Hi, hello. My name is Joshua Gongora, and today I'm going to be talking about the documentary uh, the Eugenics Crusade. It's about immigration in the 1920s, and I'm going to be answering some questions about the video. Um, firstly, something that's asked is what kind of arguments were used to justify the exclusion of certain ethnic groups, and how are these tied to the to ideas of racial superiority. um, I think the way this was tied to the idea of racial superiority was through someone like Henry Goddard, uh, who used race science to justify a lot of these policies. He famously used an intelligence quotient test to filter certain immigrants from coming into the country. He was quoted as having said, "Feeble-mindedness is the root cause of two-thirds of the problems you have before you," and according to him, the cause was defective ancestry. Um, so I think it's fair to say that he was a subscriber to the belief that some of these races were naturally superior to others in terms of intelligence. Um, and something else that's also asked is, in what way do today's restrictive immigration policies mirror those of the past of the 1920s, and in what way do they mirror the eugenics movement and all these sort of other racial ideas that fueled those policies? I think one way it does it is that a lot of the ideas that fuel the modern anti-immigration movement are some of the same ideas in terms of genetics, like the belief that certain populations, because of their culture, religion, or simply because of their physical characteristics, are less able to integrate into American society. For example, it's sometimes believed by some people that Muslims or anyone of Arabic ethnicity are often painted as being unintelligent or barbaric or practicing backwards beliefs. I don't think that's too different from when the scapegoat was white Europeans, and they thought that Italian immigrants, for example, were had some sort of predisposition to criminality due to them being in the mob, or something of that nature. Um, these sorts of beliefs were like those of Madison Grant, who famously said, they had inferior Mediterranean genes. Uh, I think it's that same sentiment that fuels a lot of these current policies, especially in the hands of a more far right government. It's the same idea, just applied to someone else, to another race. That would be the only difference. And then finally, you know, identifying examples where you know like the history of eugenics and and immigration, what it tells us about who's considered American, and how it shapes national identity and so on. um I think many of the people that are typically excluded nowadays are not white Europeans, but instead people of maybe a more darker skin color. And I think this comes out of the same thing, as I mentioned before, from people like Madison Grant that they mentioned in the documentary, is, like the idea of race science and IQ, that there's some sort of like pyramid, like Madison Grant mentions in his book, that there's this pyramid and that the Nordic races are on top, and it goes down to the Mediterranean and the Asiatic and so on until it gets to the bottom. I think it's the same thing that shapes national identity. Um, and I think it's reflected in our current immigration policies. For example, the Trump administration right now for has an asylum quota where it's letting in more white South Africans, for example, than any other race or any other country. And it's an incredibly strange, unfair, and unfavorable policy. It doesn't seem to make any sense. But I think it's coming from that same place, that same belief in a sort of pyramid. These people, they look like us more. They have more genetic similarity to us. They can integrate into our country better. That's the kind of belief, and that this comes from some genetic predisposition, that because some races are naturally one way instead of another. Um, I think that's the way, a major way that these kind of beliefs going all the way back to the 1920s, as mentioned in the documentary, shape and fuel our immigration policies, and as an extension, our national identity, which we have today. But yeah, I mean, that would be the way I would answer these questions, and I think that the documentary provides a lot of insight into the nature of immigration and anti-immigration sentiment. But thank you. That's all I have to say, and I hope whoever's watching this has a nice day.